Hello and welcome to the history of Star Trek. Today we're going to be covering the Cardassian Society. And here we go. The Cardassians were a humanoid species from the Alpha Quadrant. They were native to the planet Cardassia Prime, capital world of the Cardassian Union. They were known throughout the Alpha Quadrant for being extremely ruthless. The Cardassians became one of the greatest enemies of the United Federation of Planets and the Klingon Empire. When the Cardassian Union joined the Dominion in 2373, Cardassians had a xenophobic attitude towards other species, which was well established throughout the Quadrant after the Setlik III massacre during the Cardassian Border Wars, as well as when the Cardassian atrocities during the Occupation of Bajor were revealed after they withdrew from the planet Bajor in 2369. Physiology. Cardassians preferred a hotter, darker, and more humid environment than humans or Bajorans. Like other humanoid species, they evolved in a process influenced by the ancient humanoids. Externally, Cardassians were easily recognizable by each having light gray skin, two thick vertical neck ridges that receded back to the crown of their head, and an inverted tear-shaped ridge in the center of their forehead. The ridge was thickest immediately above the eyes, protecting them and creating an especially deep-set appearance. This trait earned them the derogatory nickname Spoonheads. Some Cardassians had another ridged feature, also in the shape of an inverted tear, in the center of their chest, while other members of the species were missing this trait. On Cardassian females, the ridge on the center of the forehead had a blue colorization, as did the second or third rung down on their neck ridges. This colorization may have been a form of cosmetic makeup. Cardassians had straight hair that varied in color from dark brown to jet black, though the later colorization was far more common. Males typically slicked back their hair, while women had more varying hairstyles. As with humans, their hair turned white with age. However, some male Cardassians tended to dye their hair back. The Cardassians were known for their photographic memories, which, per Dukat, were enabled by rigorous childhood training. Some, including Dukat, had the ability to resist a mind meld, which Dukat explained as simply a matter of discipline. In common with other humanoid species, Cardassians were able to produce offsprings with a variety of species, including Bajorans and Kazon. Dukat was well known to have two half-Bajoran children, including Zael and another, Mika. Additionally, Seska had a son with Kazon Kulla while stranded in the Delta Quadrant. It was also possible that humans and Cardassians were able to crossbreed, as Seska nearly convinced Chakotay, who was human, that the child was his. Society and culture. Cardassian culture was patriarchal, with the state at the top of public life, and parents within their home. Cardassians valued advanced age as a sign of strength, power, and wisdom. Cardassian architecture often reinforced established hierarchy by placing important individuals in physically high locations. The emphasis on hierarchy and other factors were fertile ground for intense rivalries between individuals and families. As a result, Cardassians were generally suspicious and regarding those who were not as foolish. For instance, irony in the human tragedy Julius Caesar was lost on Elam Garak, who thought Caesar was a fool for not suspecting Brutus would betray him. Cardassian culture valued family highly, as demonstrated in a Cardassian saying that proclaimed family is all, despite the obligations to the state that might have made Cardassians choose the state over family. Cardassian homes were typically multi-generational and patriarchal, with male and female parents sharing authority. Cardassian culture emphasized family loyalty, similar to other cultures. Cardassians placed great value on the continuation of family lines, and as such were pro-naturalist, though they were not known for having large numbers of offspring. Sometimes Cardassian children would visit their parents at work to see what they did, even if the job involved torture. In contrast to the close-knit family unit, Cardassian culture did not regard orphans highly, and provided no obvious means of social welfare for them, though adoption was not unheard of. When making a speech, the leader of the Cardassian Union may use the send-off This I vow with my life's blood for my sons and all of our sons." Neither of the two Cardassian genders is considered universally dominant over the other, though each tend to be dominant within certain specific fields within their society. Partisan Cardassian males led a life focused on military and political service, and thus societal advantages in technology and engineering have always been spearheaded by Cardassian females. Most Cardassian scientists tended to be females. This does not mean that women are regulated to maintaining the Cardassian technological base, as there were various female ship commanders and political leaders. Cardassians enjoy debate and conversation in general. Cardassian mealtime was as much about discussion as it was about eating. They would speak at length about a topic to show their knowledge, avoid saying something incriminating, or to obtain some piece of information from the person they were speaking to. Such was their love of conversation that it made a major role in their courtship. Courtship among Cardassians may include bitter, furious arguing, a fact not remembered by the confrontational Miles O'Brien, who engaged in repeated disputes with his female Cardassian co-worker, only to be shocked when it led her to become infatuated with him. Cardassian engineering standards were usually lower than Starfleet's. When Miles O'Brien ran a diagnostic of Deep Space Nine's fusion power plant, it revealed that it was operating at 13% below peak efficiency. The station's computer, still running by Cardassian standards, explained that the Cardassian specifications accepted operating efficiency within 20%. Cardassians were well known for their genetic engineering, even allowing other galactic powers to study their creations, such as the Federation. To distinguish their own creations, Cardassians always built distinctive monoclonal links into the DNA they used. A year after the conclusion of the Federation-Cardassian War, Worf stated, "Cardassians have no honor." Conversely, during the Klingon-Cardassian War, an officer aboard a Klingon bird of prey, the IKS Reteran, stated that the Cardassians were honorable warriors in comparison with their Jem'Hadar counterparts. Cardassians were meticulous record keepers, using well-organized files and databases. Garrick claimed that his people had instructed many other worlds, including Bajor, in their archival methods. Cardassians were well known for their punctuality. They also valued cleanliness. Cardassians were similar to Romulans in their xenophobic tendencies, and also shared a Romulan belief that there was no such thing as luck. Like the brain, they treated their prisoners with little tolerance or sympathy, and had no qualms with using torture to extract information. Some Cardassians were even known to enjoy torturing their prisoners, and to do so whether there was information to be extracted or not. Within the Obsidian Order, at any rate, the practice of torture was so much a cultural custom that having to torture someone closely acquainted with the torturer was sometimes used as a test of loyalty for those who wanted to join the Order or rejoin the organization. Additionally, Cardassians were similar to Ferengi in that they were known for paying their bills. During the Cardassians' military occupation of Bajor, many officers accepted bribes to overlook suspicious activities, for additional food, or for other favors. To many Alpha Quadrant species, Cardassians were seen as nothing more than arrogant, cruel, cold-blooded killers. Education. Cardassians consider their educational system to be unparalleled in the Alpha Quadrant, and educational attainment was regarded as a key asset in Cardassian society. Cardassian children were often put into intensive mind training programs from as early as 3 or 4. It is because of these mind training programs that some Cardassians were able to resist a mind meld. Cardassians were also trained during this time to have a photographic memory. A typical Cardassian view on how children should be raised was summed up in Dukat saying, "Education is power, joy is a vulnerability." However, Cardassian children were also indulged with pets, trips to Cardassian amusement parks, and other pastimes. Religion. Ancient Cardassian civilization exhibited vibrant religious practice. Its rituals and structure were unknown. During this period, prior to the establishment of the modern Cardassian Union, resource shortages, famine, and plague became rampant throughout the Cardassian homeworld, evidently killing large portions of the population. In order to survive, Cardassian society embraced totalitarian police state, which would be strong enough to provide the materials needed for its citizens. As the ancient religion was a deviation from the utter devotion to the government, the modern Cardassian Union was founded as a non-theistic society where loyalty to the state achieved profound importance. Modern Cardassians seem to regard the religions of other galactic species as backwards, as evidenced by their actions during the Bajoran occupation, though extenuating circumstances may have played a role in this. During the period in which Cardassia was a member of the Dominion in 2373, most Cardassians did not view the founders as deities, instead focusing on their physical properties as shapeshifters. Rather than believing in luck, Cardassians believe that all outcomes are ultimately determined by each individual's strength or will. Modern Cardassians exhibited involved funeral practices. Funeral services were open to the entire Cardassian public, especially memorials for memorable figures. Cardassian graves are believed to be only in-ground burials, and are marked, especially for those of high-ranking or famous people, such as war heroes or great scientists, with monuments of varying degrees of ornamentation and size. Cardassians considered viewing of their corpses by non-Cardassians as taboo. A unique aspect of Cardassian end-of-life practice was known as Shiri Tal, when a dying family member passed on all their secrets to their surviving relatives, so they could use them against the dying one's enemies. Philosophy. The ideal Cardassian life was one of complete loyalty and servitude to the state and family. The Cardassian government was assumed to be omniscient, omnipotent, and benevolent. In a sense, when the Cardassians abandoned their spiritual ways and began expansion throughout the Alpha Quadrant centuries ago, they simply applied a twisted form of their religion to their political philosophy. A typical example of the Cardassian approach to life was found in their criminal trials, in which the conclusion was always determined beforehand. The ruling of each case was a guilty verdict, and the purpose of the proceedings was not justice in the human sense, but bringing the offender to recognize the power and benevolence of the state. A trial, therefore, was an opportunity for the state to reveal how someone's guilt was proven by what they considered the most efficient criminal investigation system in the quadrant. When Benjamin Sisko once asked Gul Dukat why bother with a trial at all, Dukat responded that the people demanded it, as they enjoyed watching justice triumph over evil. The notion that they might try an innocent man by mistake was foreign to the Cardassians, as they believed in and always operated under the assumption that Cardassians don't make mistakes. The typical Cardassian approach, therefore, was direct, simple, and ruthless, uncaring about how many aliens or Cardassians were trampled in the interests of the state. Cardassians prided themselves on their attention to detail and memory. They had no interest in science for its own worth, and demanded that the scientific projects, like everything, serve military benefits. Cardassian philosophy placed a central value on strength, not necessarily physical strength, but the strength of a person and the collective will. When Dr. Bashir recovered from a mental attack by Latheran, Garrick held responsible Bashir's strength for having enabled him to survive. In general, Cardassians believed that the strong had a right to rule over the weak. While stranded on a planet with Benjamin Sisko, Dukat explained how the Cardassians justified the occupation of Bajor. Quote, Dukat, "From the moment we arrived on Bajor, it was clear that we were the superior race. But they couldn't accept that. They wanted to be treated as equals, when they most certainly were not. Militarily, technologically, culturally, we were almost a century ahead of them in every way. We did not choose to be the superior race. Fate handed us our role, and it would have been so much easier on everyone if the Bajorans had simply accepted their role." This kind of attitude, attributed to most Cardassians, was even enough to compel the Ferengi Quark into helping the resistance cell that Major Kira led against the Cardassians on the space station alternatively known as Deep Space Nine or Terok Nor in 2374. Cardassian philosophy typically upheld the idea that the ends justify the means. After the Cardassians unearthed the burial vaults of their ancient ancestors, which were filled with rare artifacts, they sold them to other species to pay for their own war efforts, as well as to feed the starving population on the Cardassian homeworld. Additionally, the extraction of Bajor's natural resources was considered an appropriate means to feed the Cardassian population, despite the fact that it required the occupation of Bajor's homeworld. Furthermore, in an attempt to help the USS Voyager make its way back to the Alpha Quadrant safely, Seska, a Cardassian in disguise, was willing to sacrifice a Starfleet replicator to the Kazon Nistrum in return for their protection, believing that Voyager's quick and safe return home would justify whatever actions were taken to attain that end. In the aftermath of the Dominion War, the Cardassians were left in a state of almost entire devastation, their homeworld completely ruined. One of the greatest questions facing the Alpha Quadrant was whether Cardassian would remain entrenched in its own bloody system, or if a reform to a weaker, more Federation-style democracy was possible. Arts, specifically literature and painting, were highly regarded in Cardassian culture. Cardassian literature often reflected Cardassian values such as family, duty, and the glorification of the state. Examples of Cardassian literature included The Never-Ending Sacrifice, an epic tale spanning 7 generations of a history of a Cardassian family, which displays selfless obedience to Cardassia. Meditations on a Crimson Shadow, a novel by Prelock, set in the future concerning a war between Cardassians and the Klingon Empire, and the Enigma Tales of Shogloth, a series of mysteries in which all suspects are guilty, but the trick is figuring out what crime each one committed. Citizenry and the state. Cardassians gave their first molar to the Bureau of Investigation at age 10. Cardassian society had the most rigid and, to the Federation, incomprehensible of all legal systems. Every suspect was inferably deemed guilty before even appearing in court. Their sentence, already spelled out, almost always was either death or imprisonment in a harsh labor camp. The criminal was given a conservator, equivalent to a public defender, except that the conservator was not supposed to win, but to prepare the criminal for a moving confession of guilt on the floor of the court. The accused was also permitted an advocate, the Nestor, to advise them during the trial. The chief archon, or judge, of the court played to a televised audience, their duty not to judge the prisoner's innocence or guilt, but rather to give an empathic display of the futility of crime on Cardassia, and reinforce the public's trust in the judicial system. Charges against the accused were announced at the commencement of the trial itself. The execution date was set in advance, and only the offender's spouse, as well as a court-assigned Nestor and counsel, could attend the trial. Military. The modern Cardassian Union employed a military made up of both males and females. The actual size and percentage of males and females serving was unknown, but it did look primarily male. This did not mean gender bias extended within the military hierarchy, as female Cardassians were able to be promoted to the rank of Gull and Legate as their male counterparts, and male subordinates showed no hesitation in following orders given by female superior officers. Organization. The Cardassian military normally was administered by the elected Detapa Council. Under the Detapa Council was the Cardassian Central Command, made up of career military, which often operated autonomously. In 2372, after the destruction of the Obsidian Order the previous year, actions of the Cardassian dissident movement restored the Detapa Council's authority. During Cardassia's membership in the Dominion, Gul Dukat appointed himself leader of the Cardassian people, eliminating civilian oversight. History. In its ancient history, before Cardassia became a military dictatorship, the Cardassian society was known as the first Hebetian civilization. It was home to fine art and beautiful architecture. Once the Hebetian civilization fell into decay from a lack of natural resources, millions of Cardassians were starving and the planet was subjected to utter chaos. Though the Hebetian society and the way of life eventually became extinct, The remaining Cardassians turned to the military to solve their problems. This began the Cardassian policy of expansion into the Milky Way galaxy to provide the much-needed natural resources to sustain its population. Cardassians were capable of interstellar travel by the middle of the 22nd century. At some point before 2154, Origin scientists observed a starship crew that had been infected by a silicone-based life form found on the surface of an M-class planet. During the 24th century, Cardassians were involved in 3 cataclysmic wars. The first major war was with the Federation in the mid-24th century, which ended in a turbulent peace treaty. A second war broke out when the Klingon Empire launched an unprovoked and unjustified invasion into Cardassian territory, after a successful rebellion had overthrown the military's rule. The Klingons believed that the coup was the result of a changeling infiltration, and therefore attempted to take over the Cardassian Union. The coup was, in fact, successful, due to the Obsidian Order having been collapsed after the Battle of the Omeran Nebula. This war devastated Cardassian infrastructure, with a loss of life and territory. The third and largest of these conflicts was the Dominion War. In order to drive out the Klingons from their territory, destroy the Maquis in the demilitarized zone, and regain Cardassia's status in the Alpha Quadrant, Gul Dukat signed a treaty making Cardassia a member of the Dominion. Cardassian and Dominion forces proceeded to push the Klingon fleet out of Cardassian territory and wipe out the entire Maquis movement within a few days. While initially the alliance with the Dominion seemed to be beneficial to Cardassia, in the long run it resulted in an exponential loss of life. Near the end of the Dominion War, Cardassia Prime was struck by Jem'Hadar raids and orbital bombardment from the Dominion and Breen forces in orbit of the planet, which attempted to wipe out the Cardassian species entirely for their betrayal. Nearly 1 billion Cardassians were killed in a few short hours. Hey, thank you for watching the history of Star Trek. Very special thanks to Memory Alpha for all information you heard today. Hope you all have a good day. Bye-bye!